Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Streamtime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, as of recording this, the NFL will kick off in, maybe about 8 hours from now. And we had our Sports Pro in-house NFL draft. Nick, it's actually the only redraft league that I did this year. I'm exclusively in Dynasty leagues other than this. So before yesterday, have you been in any other drafts, or is that your first one?
You know what? I sometimes do a few of those, what do you call them? Like they just auto redraft ones you can get through ESPN or Yahoo, where you just click a button, say draft now, and you pick a few teams. And I don't really think they're very good because they're only 10-team leagues. You pick players that, like, your team's loaded with good players all the time. And actually it's not as fun when you're trying to find the diamonds in the rough when you've got a bigger league. So I do that. I don't really enjoy it. I've got one that I did with an auction style, which I did at 4 a.m. in Jamaica time here, which took 2.5 hours. So I don't recommend doing an auction draft if you don't have time to spare. I did my last pick whilst my last few picks and bids making breakfast for my kids, and then the last pick was literally in the car on the way to pick them up before school before I turned the ignition on. So I didn't do it whilst driving. That's a step too far. So I've done a few. And they're fun, but yeah, I definitely think I need to probably find a few more groups of legit redraft leagues. I'm in now 2 dynasty ones, and that's about it.
Yeah, I'm actually the one that convinced all of my friends to go to Dynasty because inevitably someone always gets injured and then they just stop kind of trying because their team's not any good. Or the worst thing they'll do is they'll start trading away the really good players and you start getting imbalance in the league. So I found Dynasty is a good way that even if you suck, hey, you get Caleb Williams with the first overall pick next year. Like, there's a reason to take joy in being bad.
Sure, but I would say hopefully we're not losing everyone talking about fantasy sports too detailed here in the first few minutes. But one thing that goes against that is if your team's not very good, then you don't really care through the whole season. You're just waiting kind of till the next season that kicks off. Or if you kind of really do know your way around Dynasty, then you can try and get smart with some trades and things. But otherwise, the season becomes a bit of a lost cause anyway. So I think there's pros and cons on both. I think it's nice to have a mix of things that are longer term. I joined a Dynasty and I inherited a team, and it's taken 3 years to become remotely competitive. So otherwise I was just biding my time for this moment. So pros and cons to both.
Well, speaking of fantasy, everyone who at least is a frequent listener, anyone that's listened to me at any sporting event that we've hosted at Sports Pro knows that I would beg any company to provide a service that provides a highlight package. It's personalized. All I can do is just upload my fantasy team, and when I wake up on Monday morning, I have a custom package of highlights. And to date, I've been told it's not possible, that it's too difficult. But I'm hoping with the use of AI, which we'll talk about today with our guests, that I'm going to hear it is possible. So this seems like a great time to bring in Ross Tanner, who's the SVP of EMEA for Magnify. Now, Ross, I know Nick doesn't want to talk too much about fantasy sports anymore, but can you at least tell me that I'm not living in some, fantasy to think that this is, too far away?
Well, Chris, you very much are living in a fantasy world, of course. But yeah, no, I think for us on the AI side, let's just say we are looking at this area at the moment, and let's see what happens in the future. Because me as a former EPL fantasy player, very much like the game itself, and the EFL have started one recently as well, which I've literally got into this season actually, which is very interesting. But with a family of two small children, it's very difficult to spend time, and obviously a busy job as well, into the fantasy space. But yeah, the beauty of AI, as we'll cover off during this podcast, I think it's the beauty is it enables you to do quite a lot of things, right?
Absolutely, especially with just how important everyone's time is now. Short form, highlight style content has never been more important in people's lives, whether it's fantasy sports or just interest in a team or an athlete alike anywhere in the world. So good to have you on, Ross. Look, lots to talk about today.
Indeed, no, thanks for having me on both. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to getting to the crux of it all.
So before we really dive deep into the AI side of things and some of the different applications and, talking about monetization, the things that people really love, maybe you could give us a little bit of a brief history about Magnify, sort of where you guys have come up from, and, maybe some key milestones in your development for people that are not familiar with your business.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, Videoverse is our group name. So we've literally been around now for the best part of 8 years. So we were founded in 2016 in Mumbai in India. And the initial sort of focus from the original founders was to really look at enhancing and improving the editing workflow. So editing and post-production was an area of focus in the early stages in 2016. And then as sort of things sort of moved on, they looked at the ways that cloud could be used in editing. So they released a product called Elisto or Listo, depending on how you pronounce it. And that was the kind of main sort of champion product which Videoverse had sort of around the 2017, 2018 mark. And that was a B2B solution, but it was also a direct consumer business as well. So anyone that wanted to content edit with production pieces, they could effectively come into our platform and then edit content, add bumpers, stings, logos, move things around. And the beauty of cloud, of course, is that you could be sat in London, the US, Asia, wherever it may be, and you can edit from wherever that content could be, and it could be played around wherever you want. Then fast forward to sort of 2018 onwards, there was very much a focus on, okay, further back in the stream to the content stream itself. So in sport predominantly, it was like, okay, there is lots of live production and live sources of production coming out. So there's the advancement of live cloud production, AI streaming cameras. Is there a kind of room in the market to have an AI clipping and highlight solution? So that was where Magnify was born in 2018. So in 2018, there was very much a focus on looking at the AI models and developing the models intuitively at our HQ in Mumbai. And then from around sort of 2019 into 2020, there was very much a focus on, okay, do we have a product that is actually ready for market? And they tested it quite significantly with a lot of local broadcasters in India and governing bodies, federations, leagues, to see if there was a product fit effectively. And there was quite a bit of traction in those early stages in 2020. And that sort of brought into a kind of key raise, Series A raise of around $12 million. And that enabled sort of operations and serving the clients that came on board in the early stages. And then fast forward into 2022, there was kind of another key raise of $46 million. So once they kind of domestically sorted out where Magnify could sit in that market, they got Sony, Disney Hotstar, and many other sort of clients locally that kind of enabled them to kind of get the next series of raise, which is $46 million. And then from there was global expansion. So in the last sort of two and a bit years or so, from the $46 million, it's enabled the growth into international markets effectively. So I came on board at the beginning of 2023. There's a team in the US that came on board just before that. And then we've recently hired a key guy in the APAC markets. Actually, today, it's been announced. So there was very much a focus on sort of growing the product and bringing it out into international markets. And we're serving, I think, 50 plus clients now in the market, and we're growing exponentially in terms of growth at the moment.
So effectively, Ross, what we're talking about here is Magnify is providing the AI content production capabilities, putting it in the hands of platforms, of sports properties, teams and leagues, to help them basically create way more content than they've ever been able to do at a fraction of like the scale that they've needed internally to this point. So basically a lot less resource and heavy, a lot more, the ability to create a lot more content. And let's face it, Chris, we spend a lot of time talking about the media side of sports primarily here. And this is what this is really about. It's enabling that part of the world of producing a lot more content, distributing a lot more places, making it all fit for purpose for the platforms. That's in a nutshell, Ross. It's enabling all these sports organizations to really do that at scale and at a high quality.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Nick. So Magnify exists to effectively streamline content production. So obviously when you get through the live streams into the kind of post world, it's very much Magnify's focused on the immediacy of clips and highlights, which are effectively designed by a rights holder or rights owner to order. So if you want clips and highlights of a certain duration in a certain aspect ratio delivered automatically to a social media channel or to an OTT channel, we're very much focused on that in terms of low latency. Speed to market is critical. If you are holding these rights or owning these rights, you'll know, Nick, especially on social media and yourself, Chris, is that you need to be there immediately to make sure you're first to market with your clips. And so our latency in terms of delivery times of getting clips to market for our customers is very low. So you are talking for individual clips around 10 to 30 seconds per clip. And then match highlights can be anything from sort of 2 to 3, 4 minutes or so, depending on the duration of those highlight packages. And so we also combine anything from match highlights itself, but we also ensure that stings, bumpers, logos, translations we now do automatically into around 80 different languages. So if we are working with a sort of pan-regional broadcaster, for example, then they can target that content in its native language, and it means that regionalization of that content is appeasing that local audience. And then similarly, if a federation, league, or even a club has ambitions to do so as well. We were speaking to a small federation yesterday, actually, based here in the UK, and they simply just have live streams coming up to their website, and that's it. They have no highlights provisioned or clip provisioned on socials or anywhere, but they want to begin that journey. And one thing I always talk about on calls with people I speak to or people I meet face to face is social media is the window to the world. It's a marketing vehicle, effectively. So if you can get your clips and highlights there and some more ancillary content, which can be produced in different ways for the different platforms, and the golden egg really is to convert those, obviously, to come back into your own operating channels, right? And so even if you are a small federation or league, beginning that journey like this people were speaking to yesterday, I think it's imperative, because the audience of tomorrow is a young audience that sits on these social channels, and you need to be there, you need to be seen, and you need to get stuff back to your own operating channels. So we talk about that even with the smallest leagues and feds that we speak to or broadcasters. It's a route that they need to go down, and I think AI and the cost of what we sell to market just enables them to do that, really.
And in terms of, you were talking about the production times, and I think you actually told me before you were at Magnify, you used to be a producer, so you have a pretty good familiarity with what some of these processes are. I think I referenced in our phone call, Andreas Hayden, when he was at DFL, referred to it as glass to glass. I think Magnify has their own expression that is related to that you can tell me. But in terms of that process, like, where are you seeing the biggest bottlenecks, and where is Magnify necessarily helping to expedite those processes to where you say being able to get those clips in a matter of 3 minutes, from a production perspective, where are those bottlenecks usually taking place?
Yeah, Chris, I mean, just to rewind slightly, you're absolutely right. I was a content producer for about 10 years myself, albeit now it was 14 years ago that I left that kind of world. Back then, it was tape-to-tape editing, it was Avid editing, Final Cut editing, or EVS. They were kind of the main modes of content production for clips and highlights. And obviously I've been out of that world for many years, but coming back into the AI and clipping space now, it's a really interesting space to be in. And to answer your question, I think when we were back sort of doing live production services 10 years ago, it was just generally truck OBs that would live produce the premium levels of content. So your Premier Leagues, the FA Cups, the NFLs, etc., the top end of sport. Actually, fast forward to around 4, 5, 6 years ago, technology has changed the dynamics of the way that sport's produced. So cloud-based production obviously was introduced into the world. Live cloud production enables you to produce sport at different levels and get things to market. Obviously, that comes with different challenges, of course, around bandwidth, but generally it's another route to market and enables these kind of smaller leagues and feds to produce content they may not have produced before. And also I came from the AI camera streaming world as well with my previous role. And that has obviously opened up another world in terms of providing live streams that have never been produced before to market. So I think by doing that, now you've got different modes of live production that can be used to get to market. But actually at the other end of that, so once a live stream is produced, there is challenges around the clips and highlights side for sure, and just making sure the profitability of that content meets obviously the return on the investment. So if you're producing a live stream with live cloud production services or with Pixelart or with Spidio or any of the kind of AI streaming businesses that are out there, you need to kind of look at that kind of margins around how much it costs to produce versus the return on the investment. And so I guess to come back around to your question around bottlenecks, I think there is there needs to be more of a focus, and that's where obviously Magnify come in around providing a clips and highlight service at that end point of the journey in the production flow, as it were, to ensure that obviously there are moments out there from these smaller leagues and sports that see the light and day across social media or into owned and operated channels.
So one thing that comes to mind when I hear people talk about AI and indeed the role it can play and is playing around content, you obviously hear things talked about more generally around generative AI, and then the conversation around AI is that it just makes the use of, or the processes of things like creating content just so much easier. Just talk us through what sort, when you're giving the tools, giving a Magnify or whatever tools to someone, how skilled do they need to be? Because the one thing I do is I've talked to people like who work in the production space and who work in editorial, and it can be quite hands-on, quite cumbersome. Now, obviously, this technology is supposed to democratize that, but just how much skill could even someone like me come and use the technology and be able to start getting to work? Or how hands-on actually is it? Is it literally, does someone click a button and then press publish and then they're good to go? Like, what's the line between needing a lot of skill and basically needing none?
It's very small, actually, Nick. So to answer your question, it's very easy. It's the simple, short answer. I think to give you an overview of how the tech works, before I get into that, actually, just quickly on the end-to-end automation is where the sweet spot of Magnify is. That needs no humans involved in that process. You send us a broadcast stream, an RTMP feed, an SRT link, ingest into our platform. We work our magic in terms of the AI and clipping and highlights to order, and then it's syndicated that content to wherever it used to go, whether that's social channels or an OTT channel, wherever it used to go, or an editing system as well, it could go into to be further edited. But that entire flow itself is truly automated if you want it to be, apart from obviously telling to us what rules and conventions you want with the clips and highlights, which is done via an online form that we have in our platform. So the answer there is it's very easy to get in, and that's why we've had a lot of success with Magnify with that kind of tier 2 and downwards, because a lot of them don't have that expertise in production and in sort of editing or content production and distribution and syndication, all that kind of stuff. So that is one way that kind of we work with customers, is that end-to-end automation of clips and highlights. The second route, and this depends on the level and value of the content rights, is we see one of three things really in the market. Is generally, if it's kind of low or mid-tier content, it's generally the end-to-end automation is kind of what we see in terms of the clips and highlights to order. However, as you go up the kind of sports hierarchy into the top end of the market, we generally see some, and it's not all, this is kind of an estimation, but an 80% sort of reliance on the AI itself, and then there's 20% on the manual touch-up before it goes to market. And that's because if domestic rights in a certain market, which are top-tiered, that editorial control is still hugely important for these broadcasters, events, and leagues. I do think that narrative will kind of evolve and change, because as machine learning evolves and get better, we will see over time that actually it will probably get to 100%. And actually, we talk about it regularly on what we speak to the market, is actually streamlining content production is massive in terms of end-to-end automation, and actually focused on the ancillary content that goes around the matches itself with more creative heads. Like clips and highlights to order and getting out fast is the kind of need, and what the audience doesn't mind these days. The ancillary content and the more engaging content that can be produced by humans, where obviously that can be done manually.
So one of the things I want to sort of switch into, you made the comment about social media as the window, and we've talked a little bit about monetization, and obviously highlights being a big part of that. I guess we can almost start wider and, work more narrowly, but especially, I guess, for those tier 2, or we can call them challenger sports, whatever categorization we want to give to those, the non-NFLs, the non-Premier Leagues, sort of how powerful are the value of highlights? And would you say there's a general sense of like how much they're currently undervaluing what they can do with the power of highlights, and, where Magnify can help drive some value out of those that they're maybe not already doing?
We always start with, and you guys both know this, is live streams exist, tier two downwards, challenger sports, whatever you want to call them, as you referenced. And they exist with just live production generally of the live stream itself, which may appear on an OTT channel, or it may appear on social media. That is just not the way that people consume content these days. The kind of avid fan that really likes that piece of content will maybe sit there and watch an entire 90-minute football match, for example. But actually, as you know, Chris and Nick, clips and highlights that are curated, especially for me to look at them whenever that I want to look at them, or whatever platform I want to look at, is kind of a hugely important thing. So we kind of shift that mentality into the people we speak to in the market and say, look, you're doing live streams already. You may be doing a level of kind of clips and highlights, but you're not doing it to a kind of great level. So therefore, leverage our technology. And also, and I kind of alluded to this earlier in the podcast, is the window of the world is social media, and you have to be there and be seen and drive the traffic back from those channels into your own and operated channels to get that sort of data, combined the first party data with obviously what people are viewing, and obviously upsell when they're in your ecosystem with tickets, merchandise, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, even for these smaller feds and leagues, it's important to be on that journey. There is some basic stuff we talk about as well, which won't surprise you, which is with sort of highlight packages, they can be sponsored by X brands. So if you've got sort of curated match highlights, top 5 goals, top 5 saves, they can be brought to you by X brands. And I think that's a quick and easy win generally to monetize the highlights that come out. A little bit old hat these days as well, but pre-roll and mid-roll advertising within OTT channels as well, I think is something else which is important. And if you are a subscription-based OTT as well, like, you need inventory in there for people to watch. People don't just want to sit and browse through a 90-minute football match or whatever it is, or a cricket match. They want to see clips and highlights that they want to see and be personalized. The one thing which perhaps many people don't know, which we talk about regularly to the market, is we provide automated sports event data as well, which comes out of each clip. So generally it comes with the competition ID, the team names, the player names, the moment in that game. So say, for example, it's a goal by a certain player and the minutes at that moment. So that data can be leveraged across an OTT platform as markers. So say, for example, X player scores in 10 minutes. And that data can be obviously leveraged in the ecosystem of a broadcaster, federal league, or whoever they are. And I think that's hugely interesting for a lot of these organizations, that we're not just seen as an automated clipping business and highlights business, we're actually a data business too.
So Ross, to the point about OTT and directing to your own and operated platforms, I'm just very simply in practical terms, how easy is it once it's all connected up? Is it basically just a click of a button and a tick box? Like, okay, I've created this clip now. Where am I going to send it? And you just click a couple of tick, tick, tick. Yeah, it's going to go TikTok. It's going to go to our own our OTT app, and press a button and publish, and that goes. Is it really just as simple as that, or is it more complicated, more nuanced?
Simple as that. For the customer side, it's as simple as that. Obviously, we've got API integrations with social platforms into OTT platforms, and obviously that takes time. But generally, from the customer side, it is as simple as that. Click, 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 and tick what you need and write down what you need on a form. The bit, obviously, which I mentioned before, is we do actually have, and this is leveraging the beginning of the Videoverse journey, is an editing platform. So we actually, in our ecosystem of products within Magnify, have leveraged what was built originally back in 2016. So customers can come into our web-based platform and essentially look at the content that's been automatically generated, curate it, add bumpers, logos, stings, move the edit clips around, change the editing handles, and then put their editorial stamp on that piece of content before sending it out. And also as well, it won't surprise you that initially we were very much focused on the immediacy of live, like highlights and clips, but we're moving slightly into the archive space as well. So essentially allowing our customers to ingest all of their archive content and create content stories. So we know the value of archive, and if you are in a league or a club, which I've worked out by myself many years ago, you need to create content packages that sit outside the match day itself to kind of appease fans. So if it's a random Tuesday where there's no game on, for example, is there kind of a top five like derby game that they've had in the past, and just bringing those to life again, I think is a huge part, obviously, of maximizing the rights that you have.
So one of the things you mentioned, Ross, is about how consumption is changing of sports content just generally. How much are you having to spend time educating and talking to the sports teams, leagues, platforms about that? Or do they all kind of get it because they're already talking to you? Or are they, you have to say, like, before you jump in, go down that direction with your content strategy, just be aware that this is what they're doing now. They're not doing what you're doing, or they're not doing more of the same of what you're, they're not consuming as much of what you're already doing. You need to do more of X instead of Y. Is that the sort of stuff you're having to go down to get people really on the same page of where modern trends are facing, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I come from, obviously it helps with my background with production itself, and then obviously was in the data business for many years as well. So the knowledge and expertise I have in that area, I come across as more of a consultative sort of person in these areas to sort of say that this is what X league or X broadcaster are doing, and leveraging some of the client success that we've had actually in with our service and what they're doing in the market. But yeah, I think obviously what I was talking about before in terms of being on these kind of platforms and being seen and being having the ability to draw audiences back is just critical. But yeah, education for sure. And I think there is still curiosity in what we do in terms of, and general buzzword of AI is very much a kind of, as we know, a hot topic. And you guys obviously do your conference in a couple of weeks' time, right? Just on that particular topic. But there are ones for sure, and especially in editorial teams where there is kind of skepticism around what it all is and what it does. And so there's lots of POCs that we have to do and to just gain that trust. And then once you've got the trust, you can then obviously advise accordingly on where they need to be at in terms of each platform and what type of content they need to be producing for these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, for one of the things that really stands out to me when we're talking about this dichotomy, I suppose, of the value of live versus non-live, is that I would argue, depending on the sport and depending on where they are at on their journey, that highlights are now more valuable than the live experience if it's a sport that hasn't got an established footprint for live sports. In terms of it, the live content almost becomes the enabler of creating loads of more great short form stuff that can engage audiences all year round, rather than what sports has always been built on, this legacy that live is everything. But actually, a lot of sports aren't always built for live, the long form of live, to be something that everyone's want to watch. Maybe the top tier fan in certain instances, but generally the highlights are really what's going to appeal to much bigger scale and potentially attract more interest in the sport, right?
Well, Nick, I might just use an example of a recent client of Ross's and our friend David Guinan at the Cowboy Channel. Like, I'll be honest with you, I'm probably not going to watch a 5-hour rodeo, but I reckon if you put some large animals being ridden by people and obstacles and lassos and things like that, I bet you could make a really great highlight package. And I think, that's just sort of an example that, to your point, like, even we think about some of these, I guess, like World Chase Tag, or I think they were trying to bring back Slam Ball. Those are the kind of things, like, I might not watch a full sit down, but some of these things that are doing a bit crazier, and you think about like what goes viral on TikTok, and it's usually some of those moments as opposed to the full length of something. And I definitely think there's arguments to be made in the attention economy that we're at. It needs to fit within the moment of a TikTok, which is going to be better than something long form, particularly for some of those challenger sports where I'm not going to commit 2-3 hours to, but I would be happy to sit down and watch a 60-second highlight as I'm scrolling through on my phone.
Ross, one of the points you've made a couple of times is about that journey from, like, the clip, the video view on a social platform, the windows you called it, and taking them on the journey to owned and operated. I mean, my view on it now these days is that sort of journey is actually evolving somewhat, because things like what YouTube are doing, what the role of social media is just so powerful now. The point I just made around highlights, are you just not just through the magnifying lens, but just more generally, what's your view on that? Do you feel like actually you don't necessarily need to drive people to owner operated platforms if you've got a really robust and fast growing audience through the social and big tech channels? You're still ultimately getting a lot of consumption, and if you can drive revenue generation through whether it's YouTube's a suite of commercial opportunities, whether it be e-commerce or pay-per-view or various, and the ad-funded approach that they're able to bring to the table, or other channels. Just, do you think you need to drive them to owner operated still to get max value, or actually, if you double down just on focusing on building audiences where they are, you can still generate enough value both from an audience building perspective and from a monetization perspective?
I think it depends on the level of competition we're talking about. So if you are the EPL, the NFL, you're going to be doing all of that, right? And to very high standards. If you're the Cowboy channel, for example, you're probably just trying to do what you just described, Chris, is just having like viral moments or key moments and clips that can basically sit on social platforms. And maybe there is, I don't know this because it's not something I'm too familiar with that deal, but having sort of some sort of subscription-based channel which people can watch it for the avid fans. So I think from a fan standpoint, it's like, well, from an audience standpoint, it's very much focused on the avid fans will always come back to your own channels to watch that live experience, whenever it happens, or clips and highlights. But the ones that will see, I know, a crash or a fall or a dog running on the pitch or something fun and unique with a specific clip or highlight, I think growing audience there on socials is obviously hugely important. But I think that it's quite complex, I think, in terms of answering your question, Nick, because it's different for every Fed and league that exists out there. I think some will try and do both and they'll do it to high standards, some will do some. But I think as you go further down the chain, I'd say most of it will exist on social media. But if you want to combine if you want to kind of retain and own that first party data, I'd suggest you need to have people in your own ecosystems, right? That would be my sort of take on it.
So I'm going to switch a little more towards the monetization side of things, and we've spoken a little bit about sort of the tier twos, the challenger sports. I feel like it goes one of two ways. Either A, I don't have access to my right, or I don't have full access to my rights to be able to do whatever I want with them, or I don't feel like I can get money from a broadcaster, but I still sit on all this content. I seemingly need to find a way to get value from this content that I do have, whether because it's limited or because I'm not getting money in a more traditional manner. How are you then speaking to people, or do you have examples of where you've worked with these types of clients and you've been able to drive monetization for them in a way that perhaps they didn't think they were going to be capable of doing because of either what they were entitled to share from a content perspective, or because they just weren't getting money in like the traditional way?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very difficult because we very much in the last 18 months I've been in the Magnify business have focused on a bottom-up approach to the market. And so the value obviously of a lot of our clients' rights is very piecemeal. It's very different between each one. But generally we're talking sort of tier two and downwards in terms of that kind of level of sport or competition. So in order to monetize that content, and to find the right content packages that resonate with markets is hugely challenging. But the obvious ones, as I mentioned before, obviously sponsorship around sort of clips and highlights is something we always advise, and we help try and find media partners that can maybe come in and support these leagues and comps that need that kind of help in terms of sponsoring some of the clips and highlights, like pre-roll and mid-roll stuff as well. But it's challenging because it's less a consumed sport, and I think for me it's about a journey that I've talked about a couple of times already in this podcast. But you've got to be there and to be seen and to build an audience organically through socials. And once you've got that audience, then you have more chance to monetize that audience further. So again, it really depends on how far you are in that journey. Some of our customers purely focused on the sort of cost saving element to it. So as we know, we kind of referenced this at the top, there is a lot of sort of headcount reduction, cost saving reductions across the industry at large, whether you're kind of the biggest broadcasters in the world, or whether you're a Fed or league or whoever you may be, constantly looking to save cost and save money. And so it leans heavily into the kind of AI tools that are out there, whether it's us or others, that how can you get a better return on your investment? And so that's where we focus our attention on is actually the automation side of things. But I have tasked the senior management, including myself at Magnify, is how do we become rather than a cost line into a business, but a revenue generating line. So that is a kind of challenge that we're kind of looking at internally at the moment, which I guess for any service provider out there will be also looking at exactly that equation. So it's not an easy one to solve, but especially when it's less consumed content. If you are one of the top tier rights holders or owners out there, obviously it's a lot easier. But we've seen obviously stuff around the domestic market here with Serie A and League One, obviously doing their own and operated channels here in our OTT and stuff. It's selling rights, obviously, in these markets has been challenging for them, right? So, yeah, it's difficult. It's not an easy world out there, right?
Well, I just think it's an interesting point you raised about the cost center versus profit center, so to speak. Well, I'm sure if there's any rights owners listening out there that would be willing to help Ross do that, because I think you could very easily work an average on like what's an average piece of content's ability to generate revenue, and work out some sort of model based on, well, each piece of content on average, if you're producing X amount of content across the course of, say, a month, on average, we generate about X percent of revenue per post, then at the very least, you can see that the cost is mitigated by a percentage, if not turning into profit, depending on how much it's able to bring back. And whether that is through the traditional advertising channels that you can get through YouTube and the like, or adding that layer of advertising revenue through digital sponsorship deals that you alluded to earlier, Ross. So I'm sure someone can help you with that. But I know also that sports probably like to keep their cards very close to their chest whenever they can, whether it's be for negotiation purposes or just because they don't like anyone else knowing how they operate. But I'm sure someone out there will be able to help out.
I think it's for us as well. It's not necessarily stuff that we want to build out ourselves and bring people into the group and business. It's actually been tactical around partnering with the right people in the market, or potentially looking at M&A around acquiring certain businesses that can help us get to that next stage of our growth, really. So we're always out there in the market sort of exploring what's new and what's kind of the next phase of thing to be adopted by the sports media and tech industry. But yeah, monetization of lower tiered content is a challenge. I'll be honest, and that's something we need to solve, not just myself, but the industry at large.
I was going to say the whole industry needs to solve that one. Don't worry, Ross. It's not just on your shoulders to work that one out. One thing I wanted to pick up on is, following, Magnify has been a good supporter of Sports Pro for a while now, and one of the things that stands out to me is there's so many sports that you work with. I think I saw something like you have the capacity, correct me if I'm wrong here, to service nearly 70 sports. Just let's play a hypothetical game. If I'm a random sport, I don't know how it could be random if you've got 70 sports covered. How long does it take to get a sport up and running on a platform? Because that's an insane number. I've looked at other platforms before, and they have different types of capabilities, and they do one sport at a time. You're talking 70 plus sports. How does that even be possible?
It's a very good question. So we're able to, just quickly on the technology, actually, I've not actually covered off what it actually does and how it works, which I think will probably give you an indication of how easy it is to do. So our technology basically looks at 4 key identifiers, just so you know. So using AI, we do facial recognition, which is our kind of first sort of identifier to identify clips and moments that exist in sport. The second is we look at the broadcast graphics on screen. So the broadcast graphics will obviously indicate what's happening at a certain moment, whether that's a goal, substitution, or whatever it may be as a moment. The third will be actually listening to the commentary feed. So the commentary feed is hugely important for us to understand the narrative that's taking place at that particular moment in a game. And then the fourth is actually the name and numbers on the back of the shirts. Now, those 4 key identifiers that AI have been learned over a number of hours that have been ingested into the actual system itself. So for our top sports, for say football, cricket, tennis, basketball, the accuracy is like 95, 96% in terms of the accuracy of the clips and data and highlights that we produce. Obviously, as we come down into different sports, all sports is generally our kind of forte, but Chris's point earlier around rodeo is something I never thought we'd be able to do. But actually, the answer to your question, Nick, I think generally, obviously, accuracy comes down. You're looking, maybe it can vary, obviously, over time, but a lot of these kind of smaller feds and leagues that we work with will come on a journey with us, and they want to basically ingest their content, improve the algorithms to get what they need in terms of clips and highlights. It's one of those things that can take 10 hours, 20 hours, 50 hours. It depends. Obviously, the more ingest, the more the algorithms understand what's going on. It's machine learning after all. So the more the machine learns on a specific sport, and also as well, like we had a call yesterday actually with a kind of governing body that, again, a really sort of small sport here in the UK, and their kind of sport is very unique in terms of the way it works. And so we were saying to them, look, we would want to collaborate with you guys to understand the rules and conventions of how your sport works and plug that into our system. Because one thing we haven't discussed as well, our system also generates editorial ratings out of 5 in terms of the clips themselves. So a goal moment in football, for example, would be a 5-star moment. A 4-star would be a very good chance. 3-star would be average, 2 not so good, and 1 dreadful. And that editorial ratings for each clip obviously then builds into a highlight package. So when it comes to these more smaller sports that we've not done much before, it is very much a case of us learning in terms of the algorithms, in terms of the machine learning that exists. But actually, that a lot of that comes from the feds and leagues and clients we work with to say, actually, the editorial rating of X clip needs to be a 5 or 4-star moment. And that's a learning process with the technology that we have, which takes obviously a bit more time.
Ross, just on that point then, so how do you get that information ingested so the system understands that? Are you linking it up, for example, with a partner, the client, and saying, all right, the data of performance on the social platform, is this fed straight back into Magnify so we can tell that piece of content performed well? Or is that a little bit too granular and you're working on a sort of more of a macro approach on what works and what doesn't from a high quality content perspective? Or is it even subjective feedback?
It's a good question. So it's something which we are doing more of. So we're trying to do more analytics of social channels and own operated channels around the performance of clips and highlights. We've got a level of that so far where we're obviously using our kind of AI tools that the product teams have to get more analytics around clips and highlights and what works when you post certain clips at certain times of day or whenever it may be. That is kind of something which we're developing more, because actually the more tangible data that we can present back to customers, the more sticky we become, of course. So that's something which we're focusing more on. But obviously the customers we work with are privy to their own data, but the smaller they are, the less sort of time they have to shift through all the data. So actually we want to be sort of that consultative partner which can really help them really.
On the consultative part, how much concern do you receive when you're onboarding new customers in terms of just bringing in this new technology they've never heard? You know, there's the strategic side you talked about, but is there anything that you found is common as they're trying to onboard a new technology like this that you seem to, it comes up with every single partner or a common thread?
It's very rare, and I wish this was different, that we can do a deal where there's no testing and we can just basically sign a contract and move on and everyone's trust is there. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. I wish it did, but unfortunately it doesn't. So yeah, a lot of proof of concepts, a lot of testing that exists, because ultimately it's trust, accuracy that the customers need to ensure that if they are doing the end-to-end automation of clips and highlights, it is accurate. I spent 4 years producing content for Chelsea Football Club, for example. And if we put out some incorrect content on the TV channel or digital at the time, we would be sort of under massive sort of problems from the fans, of course. And so the same problem exists with whoever we're speaking to the market. Any incorrect piece of information that goes out to market is going to be put under a microscope, and it's not the noise that a lot of these feds and leagues and clubs want. So yeah, accuracy of content and trust is kind of pivotal really to everything working as they need it to. So yeah, they need to do a number of proof of concept over a number of weeks to gain that trust. And as I mentioned earlier in the pod, like we find with that more premium level of content, there is that human touch that comes into the plane. So we talked about 80-20% threshold. That's important for some of the kind of premium level of content. A human is still in that loop. And I think that is, in my view, still important in the process, really.
Mate, Ross, what's the next steps or the future look like for I guess for the AI perspective around content and also what you're doing within the business? Are you seeing a focus perhaps on the non-sporting content as well? Because I imagine that's coming up more and more as we're seeing the success of documentary style content, interviews, all that behind the scenes stuff that so many teams, leagues, and clubs are trying to do, and actually becoming much more easy to produce because of the power of iPhones and smartphones and alike to produce that stuff on an organic perspective. Is that an area of focus that you're already servicing or looking to service? And what's next from there?
Yeah, so there's a few things that spring to mind that we're kind of focusing on. Is we've set out a sort of task internally is to look at that production workflow end to end from glass to glass, as we describe it. And sort of when you asked me the question around bottlenecks earlier in the pod, it's for us is like, how can we use AI and our automated techniques to improve efficiencies in that flow? So we're sort of consulting to the market at the moment beyond clips and highlights. Like, is it more graphics? Is it sort of other things that we don't know about, which can really enhance that process? So that's something which we're kind of very focused on at the moment in terms of understanding from the market, what is the kind of gaps there that we need to address and we can get into. Yeah, different genres for sure, Nick, is kind of another area that we're kind of looking into the future as well. Like, we see sort of a massive focus into the news content. News, as you know, is 24/7. It's constantly moving and changing. It's high volume. And for us, high volumes of content that's ingested into our systems means high value deals. So it's a kind of a no-brainer in our view that we should probably look into that into the future. And then docs as well, like all of these kind of cut across. Whilst they could be news in sport, they obviously cut into general news, right? And so general news, especially, again, ever changing, always moving, and high volume of content. And to produce that content from 16:9 aspect ratio into all the different formats that exist for mobile, so your 1:1s, 9:16s, 4:5, that process is cumbersome in an edit suite. So we can do that all automatically for the market, again, and it's a cost saver. But yeah.
I mean, looking through the list, Ross, of some partners and clients you have listed, I mean, it's so diverse, ranging from the IPL through to the Portugal football team, I believe, Flow Sports. You've got universities in the US and across the world involved. You've got CONCACAF. It's a really vast mix. You've got the Supersport schools in South Africa. It's pretty global there. I mean, you must be spinning a lot of plates and a lot of conversations all across the world. But really looking forward to seeing how things do all shape up and whether, what are the next iterations and impact that AI is going to have on content from here. Chris, were you going to say something there?
I was just going to ask, because we'll see you, Ross, in a couple of weeks' time in London. You'll be a part of Sports Pro AI. What are you guessing will be a common question that comes up from people? Because I think we've seen a lot of interest from delegates because they don't actually quite know what they're doing yet. So if we're going to close it out on the event that will all be in person, everybody should come shake hands with us and shake hands with you and speak about Magnify. But from just a topical perspective, is there something you think is going to come up more frequently, or what is the reason you think is driving all these sports executives to come to an event like this to learn about AI?
Somewhat, it's a good question. I think some people in the sort of the last year and a half that I've been in the business, and even before that, when I was in an AI streaming camera business as well, a lot of people sort of see AI as just a marketing term that's being used in the market, and they're not really sure what it is or does. And there's kind of like the educational part to it all is very difficult. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in AI at all. I obviously sell an AI solution. I know the use cases that our product can deliver to market, which can be really compelling and help these feds and leagues and organizations that we work with. But I think it's just simplifying the message and just kind of reinforcing what is the kind of use cases that can be used with AI. And obviously, within our world, it's very much focused on the generation of clips and highlights to order, the kind of speed to market, the efficiencies that all brings into a business. And then also, obviously, building audiences. So not more just audiences in your domestic markets, but actually generating new audiences in new markets that they want to get into. The regionalizational piece, like if you can spin up graphics in native languages to a piece of the market, it just offers that regionalized approach, which a lot of these kind of organizations need to grow their businesses and grow their kind of footprints. So yeah, I think it's a difficult one to answer, but I would certainly from our side would be focusing on that kind of narrative, to be honest.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, everybody, I appreciate you joining us for another episode of Stream Time. Like I mentioned, if you are going to be at Sports Pro AI, please do make sure you come find Ross. He'll be up on stage. Him and his team will also be around the event. And if you're not coming to the event, you should be, because it's such a hot topic that everyone should be learning about. Shameless promotion. But Ross, I do just want to say thank you again for joining us. And I personally look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time.
Chris, Nick, a pleasure. Very much enjoyed it. And I already did a plug for you actually in the pod. So we've actually had 3 plugs now, I think, for the conference.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Ross. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.